Everybody, this is Steve from the Wellness Warrior. Today we are going to have a little discussion about foods that sabotage our health and well-being. So let me cue up the slides here. All right, there we go. All right. So foods that sabotage our health and wellness. All right. As usual, I am a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach, and this presentation is for educational and informational and coaching purposes only. This is not a substitute for medical advice. If you have any issues, medical issues, see your medical health provider for that. If you have some ideas about depression and feeling bad and stuff like that, please see your mental health provider. All right. So, as I said, I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. I'm a bird watcher. That's my nature connection. I have done some race directing in the past. I'm an obstacle course coach as well, and a post-traumatic growth facilitator. We'll have to talk about that one day. So today's big ideas in this presentation is going to cover the following things. It's not necessarily in any particular order, but they'll be covered as we go through the presentation. So I'll talk a little bit about how we ate before Big Ag and Big Food. We'll talk a little bit about your genes. What does insulin do? What's its purpose? We'll briefly touch on that. And then we'll go through the things that sabotage our health. So the four big groups of things that sabotage our health are sugar, processed foods, industrial oils, and grains. So we'll touch on each one of those groups in the presentation. All right, so let's briefly talk about food and insulin. So right now you can probably go into the grocery store and about 70% of that food is not really real food. It's processed food, and it's been processed a lot. So I put this picture on here because, think about, are these people going to eat any processed foods? Very unlikely. But in the United States and some other countries, people eat so many processed foods that we need the stuff on the left, which is insulin. Before 1900, there really wasn't any sugary or very many sugary foods on the market. All the big sugary food companies were just getting started right around the turn of the century or shortly after. So we didn't have this influx of sugary foods in our food system until very recently. So I'm going to briefly describe this insulin process very briefly because there's a lot more to it than this, but I'm going to give you the skinny of it. So insulin is a fat storage hormone. It's also a hormone that delivers food to cells, all right? Whether that be functioning cells or, like I said, it could be fat cells. So just to put sugar in perspective, there's about 5 grams of sugar that is in your bloodstream, all right? There's 4 grams of sugar in a teaspoon of sugar. So that's not very much running through your whole system, whole bloodstream, all right? There's some other places that store sugar too, but as far as your bloodstream goes, which is how most things travel through your body, there's only 5 grams of sugar, at least when you're in a healthy kind of spot. When you eat, especially sugary foods, that sends a signal to your brain and then to your pancreas to start producing insulin. so it can get ready for those things, coming down into the bloodstream. Then once that sugar gets from your intestines and goes into your bloodstream, then insulin's job is to take that sugar food to the different cells in the body. Okay, if there's nowhere for it to go, that gets stored as fat. So we run into problems when our cells become so conditioned to having a lot of sugar being forced on it that it becomes insensitive, basically, to insulin. So why is that a problem? Well, that's a problem because then there's more sugar in the bloodstream and your body's got to use more insulin. Then your body's got to clear that insulin. So it becomes a big cycle. So to put the sugar thing in perspective, again, think about a can of Coke. A can of Coke has about 42 grams of sugar in it. I looked at a bottle of Pepsi yesterday when I was out. It had 69 grams of sugar in it. So imagine taking down 20-ounce bottle of Pepsi, and your body has to deal with 69 grams of sugar that you're delivering to your body. So that's a lot of sugar that it's got to figure out where to go. Only 5 of it can stay in your bloodstream. There's some other places for it to go, but for the most part, it's just hanging out with the insulin, waiting to be stored somewhere. So for thousands, let's say even millions of years, we really didn't need to produce that much insulin because we didn't have that much sugar in our diets. There might have been some sugar if thousands of years ago, if we went out and found some berries to eat or something like that, or some fruit that we would eat. But other than that, we had a pretty low sugar diet, low carbohydrate diet. So we didn't need to make that much insulin. So our cells were very sensitive to insulin. But over a long period of time, our bodies have been inundated with sugar and our insulin receptors really get worn out. Our cells become less receptive. The glucose inside of our bloodstream goes up and we just can't function as well, which leads to a bunch of different metabolic problems. So that brings us to commodity crops. So around about in the 1940s, when we're at that point in civilization where we felt like we needed to feed the world, we needed to find a cheap way to deliver calories to as many people as we could because the population of the world was expanding rapidly. So we went from eating about 3,000 different types of foods to really focusing on 4. And those 4 were rice, wheat, corn, and soy. So they had a lot of sugar in them, a little bit complex sugar, but sugar nonetheless. And it was very cheap to produce, so we could feed a lot of people, just using those 4 crops. So as time went on, these plants, these organisms were modified to produce more fruit, to grow in smaller areas, to grow quicker, and even for some of these crops, we can even spray Roundup on them, and the plants still survive, which is kind of scary. The other thing that pretty much none of the 4 of these things have is very many nutrients. They're pretty much devoid of nutritional value. They don't have very many phytonutrients, and like I said, they're cheap to make. So why do I say they're in so many foods? Well, remember at the beginning, I said there was 70% of the food basically in the grocery store that's processed. So if you go look at some of those foods, they'll have corn syrup in it, might have rice syrup in it, cornmeal, and they use these things for a lot of different things. So it's weird to think about soy in particular because George Washington Carver, a long time ago, he was using soybeans to make plastic for cars and to make, plastic for a bunch of different things. So think about, using all this soy to feed people, and we can also change it to make it into plastic. Or like corn, we can make that into biogas fuel that we use. So these products are very, I guess you would say versatile, but not very nutrient rich. So why is that a problem? A lot of these crops come with a big heaping serving of gluten. All right. Gluten is the protein that's in rye, barley, and wheat. And there's a few other ones that actually have it too. So when we increase the amount of gluten, and gluten is just, a long string of amino acids. All right. But it has a little bit of gliadin in it. So what this gluten does in a lot of people is it binds to the intestinal lining. And we have something in our intestinal lining called tight junctions, which allows things to go into our bloodstream and, stay. Some stuff stay in the intestine, some things go into, our bloodstream. But these molecules leave those tight junctions open. So basically, there's a little hole in your intestines so things can go right into your bloodstream. So there's certain things in your intestines that you probably don't want to go into your bloodstream. Also, there's some things that, like unbroken down strings of amino acids, which are, parts of proteins that get into your bloodstream, and then your body attacks it because it thinks it's a foreign invader because it's not used to seeing those things. So that, when those tight junctions are left open, that's called leaky gut. All right. We didn't really have this as an idea, until about the last 10 or 20 years when we really started to get a lot of gluten and probably pesticides in our diet. So in turn, since we have this immune function going on with all of these things that are coming into the bloodstream, that causes inflammation because the immune system goes to places, attacks things, makes inflammation. So instead of being acute inflammation, when we have this leaky gut type of thing going on, then it becomes chronic inflammation. All right. And not only does gluten cause these tight junctions to stay open, but it also has very addictive qualities. You've probably heard people say, well, I can't live without bread. Well, that's because those proteins have opiate-like qualities. So people think they need it just like a drug. All right. So I can't live without my bread. I can't live without cake or whatever. That's the reasoning, because it has these addictive qualities. There's been studies that have found that people generally eat 300 to 400 more calories when wheat is in the products that they're eating. I've looked at some packaging and some ingredient lists for some things that you would never dream of having wheat in them, but they have wheat in them. Why do they have that in it? Because they want you to eat more. All right. If you're going to consume 300 or 400 more calories of their product, then you're going to buy more product. All right. And that's what they want to do. It's a big money-making thing. So again, this just makes people eat as much as they possibly can. So the weirdest thing, probably not the weirdest thing, but a thing that has wheat in it that I couldn't really never figure out until I, figured out what big ag was actually doing and big food was actually doing, was, cream of mushroom soup. Like, why would that need to have wheat in it, right? But it's in there, obviously, for a purpose, so you'd eat more of it. All right, so we got gluten and grains as our first one. Our second one is industrial seed oils. So there's been some studies done about industrial seed oils, and 80% of the standard American diet fat comes from these seed oils. All right, so Dr. Kate, and this is from drkate.com and Dr. Kate Shanahan's website. She calls these the hateful eight, and that's canola, corn, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower, grapeseed, and rice bran oil. All right, these are not good things. All right, they are similar to saturated fats, and they get incorporated into your cells as saturated fats, but they could change the shape of the cell membrane. All right, if the shape of the cell membrane is changed because they have these strange fats in them, then that degrades the cell function. Your cells are not able to function as they're supposed to. Additionally, it could even cause damage to DNA. That's how harmful some of these oils are. All right. Dr. Kate talks about these as submitting your cells to radiation damage. So, I mean, that's pretty telling when, a doctor says that, oh, if you eat this stuff, it's kind of like getting radiation poisoning. So, but people never think about it that much when they're eating those things, just because they've been eating those things for a while, and, things go into a slow decline, and they just think that's, I've heard it a bazillion times, it's just what happens when you age. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So the other things that these oils have a lot of is omega-6s. All right. So omega-6s increases inflammation. All right. It increases the fight or flight response. So these are foreign invaders in your body. All right. Let me just go through omega-6 and omega-3 again. Omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 is an inflammatory. You do need some inflammatories because, if you get a scrape, you need that to be inflamed so things can go there and repair it so you can heal. But the amount of omega-6s that these things are giving you are way off the chart. We don't need to feed ourselves any extra omega-6s. We get plenty of those. So where do you find those things? These are super easy to find. Basically, 99% of the salad dressings in the store contain one or more of these oils. All right, even though some of the ones that say olive oil on them, you can flip them over and the first ingredients will be canola oil or sunflower oil. So just because it says olive oil or avocado oil on the front, flip it over just to make sure. Frozen foods has a lot of these oils in them as well as processed foods. They use a lot of these oils as well. So the question is, how do we get oils out of these things? All right. So let's take corn, for instance. I don't know. I could smash and beat up and, pulverize a piece of corn. I don't think I can get any oil out of it. I don't know about you. Maybe you're more talented than I am, but trying to squeeze oil out of a piece of corn probably is not going to happen. But the way they get these oils out of there is that they submit these things to an extreme amount of heat, extreme amount of pressure. They put hexane in there, which is a petroleum product, to draw the oils out of there, and then that's how they collect them. It's supposed to be a lot cheaper. I can't imagine having to do all those things, make it cheaper, but they put in everything and it is a super cheap product. So they say all the hexane or the petroleum products is out before they bottle it, but how can they be 100% sure? And these oils, by the way, they also go rancid a lot quicker than the oils that are a little bit more healthy for you. So we talked about inflammation a little bit. So I just wanted to very briefly touch on inflammation. There is some good inflammation and there's definitely some bad inflammation. Good inflammation is, when you get a cut and your body has to go and repair that. You break a bone, it gets inflamed. So it can go in there and it can repair. So that's where omega-3s come in and a couple other things, but omega-3s for the most part. Omega-6s and then omega-3s go into, quell that inflammation. But chronic inflammation is bad. All right. It could be, you don't get enough sleep can cause chronic inflammation. Those foods that we just talked about cause chronic inflammation if you eat those a lot over time. Being stressed all the time can cause a lot of chronic inflammation. So we want to try to limit that as much as we can. So not having industrial oils, not having gluten or most of the grains in our diet is one way you can start doing that. So our third one is sugar. All right. Sugar is definitely the devil. Where do we find sugar? Well, we find sugar in sugar. We find it in grains because those complex sugars break down really quick and turn into sugar that goes right into the bloodstream. Processed food, treats, bread, most of that stuff is just all sugar. So I talked a little bit before about insulin taking that sugar places. So 5 grams of that sugar can be in your bloodstream. 200 grams of that sugar can be stored in muscles. And 70 grams of that sugar can be stored in your liver. All right. Anything more than that gets stored as fat. So remember that 69 grams of sugar in Pepsi that had no other nutrients in it? Probably those people are just sitting around, so they didn't have their liver wasn't depleted of sugar. Their muscles weren't depleted of sugar, so it probably just got stored as fat, right? Because it doesn't have anywhere else to go. Obviously, we're not designed to consume that much sugar. It creates a lot of body fat. Like I said, grains are sugar. And some people even get 200 or 2,000 to 2,400 calories of sugar at one time. All right, through different ways. Maybe, they go to a restaurant, they have a, Coke, and then they get a few refills of that Coke. And then they have a giant pile of French fries, which is basically all sugar and some bad oils. And they may have a giant, burger that has a giant bun on it, which is all sugar. So that can add up really fast. A Coke in and of itself, even if we think about it as having 65 grams of sugar, doing the quick math on that, that's 240 of those calories. So if you have 3 refills of that, that's already 700 calories of sugar just with the Coke alone. Having 3 of those. And I've done it in the past. I've definitely taken down 3, glasses of Pepsi in a previous life. It happens. It's easy to happen. Because when you're eating with people, and it's a lot easier to be distracted by them and continue to eat more. All right. So, and then that sugar gets locked up in our fat cells. So we have, 40 to 60,000 calories stored on our body as fat. All right. Even if you're a skinny person, you still have an, maybe 40,000, 50,000 worth of calories stored as fat. So we can go a long time without needing to replenish those fat stores. All right. We're not designed to choke down, 3 Cokes, and a pile of fries, and a giant burger. We're just not designed to do that. In that previous slide where those people are walking down the trail, they probably wouldn't see that many calories maybe in a month from carbohydrates. All right. But going from this high caloric diet to a diet that better addresses your health and wellness, it takes time. This transition is not easy. So let's talk about diets a little bit. So hopefully you can go through these questions and you already know the answers. Do diets work? Why are they called diets? And have you tried any? Do they work? I talked to a lot of people that have been on a lot of different diets in their whole life, and they're no further ahead. Why are they called diets? I guess when it comes right down to it, they're called diets just because you're changing how you eat. All right. If we went to a whole smoothie diet with those smoothies down at the bottom, you probably even gain weight because there's so much sugar in those. So, some of these things are a little bit tricky. And I'm sure all of us have tried some kind of diet in the past, whatever it was. So there's plant-based diets, there's carnivore diets, there's the every other day diet, which is, you eat whatever you want on one day, and then you have a severe calorie restriction on the other day, and you go back and forth for that. So some of these things may work for the short term and maybe losing weight, but metabolically, most of them don't do you any favors. All right. The other things that you need to think about when you're choosing which foods to eat, because I don't want to really call them a diet, is do you have autoimmunity problems? Do you have food allergies? There's a few genetic factors that come into play, and your heritage also plays a part in that, especially when we're talking about dairy. So dairy, those people that have ancestry in, Northern Europe, or kind of like where dairy kind of originated in that area, those genes have been exposed to dairy a lot longer, and usually they are lactose tolerant and casein tolerant, but other populations are not. Asians didn't have dairy cattle, so they're usually a little more sensitive, or sometimes a lot more sensitive to lactose and or casein, which casein is the protein in dairy. And then think about, Native Americans that lived in Alaska that just ate, meat and the fat that was on the meat, and that's all they had. All right. They survived, but they had that in their diet for a super long time. So basically, you need to figure out, what really works best for you. There's a lot of different things out there. All right. So if you only did and got rid of these 4 things out of your diet, you're already 80% of the way of getting on the other side of metabolic problems. Grains, seed oils, and we call those PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. So there's some good PUFAs, but most of them are bad. Getting processed foods and sugar out of your diet, you're 80% of the way to being metabolically better. So that's a good place to start. So, just a couple things before we finish up for today. If you have any questions, you can email me at that email address. You can visit my website at wellnesswarrior.coach. Most of the pictures that I got on here were from stock photos from a place called Pixabay. And they required no annotation. I did annotate Dr. Kate's picture, which had the Hateful Eight on them. So again, I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. I am the Wellness Warrior, and that is our presentation about foods that sabotage your health. Thanks for coming. Let me know if you have questions.